The candlelight flickered across the ancient stone walls of Ashford Hall as Eleanor Hartwell stood in her wedding dress, trembling not from cold, but from anticipation. Her new husband, the powerful Duke of Ashford, turned from the window with eyes haunted by something she could not name. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice breaking the silence like shattered glass, "there is something you must know, something that may make you despise me forever." Her breath caught as he stepped closer, shadows dancing across his anguished face. "I am not the man society believes me to be, Eleanor. I'm far worse than you could imagine, and you deserve the truth before this marriage is consummated. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The late summer of 1814 had painted the English countryside in hues of amber and gold, but Eleanor Hartwell saw nothing beyond the walls of her carefully constructed life. At 22, she had been groomed since childhood for one singular purpose, to become the Duchess of Ashford. Her father, Baron Hartwell, had cultivated this alliance with the precision of a master gardener, ensuring every aspect of Eleanor's education, deportment, and appearance would make her the perfect ornament for one of England's most distinguished families. Hartwell Manor, with its Palladian columns and manicured gardens, had been Eleanor's entire world. Each morning began the same way, rising at dawn, breaking her fast with weak tea and toast, then hours of instruction. French, pianoforte, watercolors, needlework, the management of a great household. Her governess, Miss Pemberton, had drilled into her the importance of maintaining composure, of never revealing one's true thoughts, of being the serene, beautiful reflection that a powerful man required in his wife. Eleanor had accepted this fate with the resigned grace expected of a gentlewoman. After all, what else was there for a baron's daughter with modest dowry but excellent breeding? Her mother had died bringing her younger brother into the world when Eleanor was 15, and her father had retreated into his library and his brandy, leaving Eleanor to raise young Thomas while simultaneously preparing for her own destiny. The Duke of Ashford himself remained largely a mystery to her, despite their betrothal being settled for 3 years. Geoffrey Ashford, 7th Duke of Ashford, was 30 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and possessed of the kind of dark, brooding handsomeness that made ladies whisper behind their fans. He had inherited his title at 18 when his father died in a riding accident, and had since managed his vast estates with ruthless efficiency. He was respected, feared even in Parliament. His word could make or break fortunes. Their courtship, if it could be called that, had consisted of 6 formal visits over 2 years, always chaperoned, always constrained by rigid protocol. He had asked her questions about literature and music. She had answered with carefully rehearsed responses that revealed nothing of her true self. The girl who secretly devoured Gothic novels, who longed to travel beyond England's shores, who sometimes stood at her bedroom window and wondered what it might be like to choose one's own path. The Duke had seemed satisfied with her performance. He had told her father she would make an acceptable duchess, which Baron Hartwell had received as the highest compliment. The marriage contracts were signed, the settlements generous enough to secure Thomas's future and restore some luster to the Hartwell name. But Eleanor had noticed something during those formal visits that troubled her. The way the Duke's eyes would sometimes darken with an emotion she couldn't name. The tension in his jaw when conversation turned to matters of the heart. The carefully controlled distance he maintained, even when propriety would have allowed him to sit closer. There was something locked away inside Geoffrey Ashford, something that made him seem more like a fortress than a man. Her one confidant in all this was her father's sister, Aunt Philippa, a widow who had spent years in London society before retiring to Bath. Philippa had arrived a week before the wedding, taking one look at Eleanor's too bright smile and too docile manner, and declared, "Good Lord, child, they've turned you into a porcelain doll. Does the Duke know there's an actual person beneath all this polish?" Eleanor had nearly wept at hearing someone acknowledge her as more than a decorative object. In quiet moments, Aunt Philippa had tried to prepare her for marriage, for the duties that awaited her, but more importantly, had urged her to find some way to remain herself. Men of great power are often men of great secrets, Philippa had warned. Whatever you discover about the Duke, remember that you too have the right to be known, to be seen for who you truly are. The wedding had been a magnificent affair, held at the medieval church on the Ashford estate. 300 guests, London society's elite, had witnessed Eleanor Hartwell become the Duchess of Ashford. She had moved through the ceremony as if in a dream, her ivory silk gown heavy with seed pearls, the Ashford family tiara pressing cold against her forehead. The Duke had repeated his vows in a steady voice, but his hand had trembled slightly when he placed the ring on her finger. The wedding breakfast had lasted for hours. Eleanor had smiled until her face ached, had accepted congratulations from people she'd never met, had endured the knowing looks and whispered comments about the wedding night to come. The Duke had remained at her side, playing his role with aristocratic perfection, but she had felt the coiled tension in him like a spring wound too tight. As the sun began to set and the guests finally departed, Eleanor found herself being led by a silent lady's maid to the Duchess's chambers in the ancient east wing of Ashford Hall. The rooms were breathtaking, all silk wallpaper and gilded furniture, a massive four-poster bed draped in heavy damask. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the warm evening, and candles glowed on every surface. The maid helped her out of the elaborate wedding gown and into a nightdress of the finest lawn, so sheer it might as well have been mist. A dressing gown of ivory silk was placed over it, and Eleanor's dark hair was brushed until it shone, then left loose around her shoulders. Throughout this preparation, her heart had begun to pound with an anxiety that had nothing to do with maidenly fears and everything to do with the haunted look she'd seen in her new husband's eyes during the ceremony. When the maid finally left, Eleanor found herself alone in these opulent rooms that would now be her domain. She walked to the window and looked out over the moonlit gardens, wondering if she would ever feel at home in this grand place. Wondering if the man she had married would ever be more than a polite stranger. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. She heard the clock in the hallway chime 10, then past. Perhaps he wouldn't come. Perhaps this was to be a marriage in name only, a business arrangement where they would occupy separate wings and meet only for formal dinners. The thought should have brought relief, but instead she felt a curious disappointment. Despite everything, despite her fear and uncertainty, there had been moments during their brief courtship when she had glimpsed something in Geoffrey Ashford, a loneliness that matched her own, a hunger for authentic connection beneath all the aristocratic formality. The door opened without warning and the Duke entered. Eleanor turned from the window, her breath catching. He had changed from his formal wedding attire into a silk banyan, his cravat discarded, his dark hair dishevelled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. In the candlelight he looked younger, more vulnerable, and infinitely more troubled than she had ever seen him. "Eleanor," he said, and there was something raw in the way he spoke her name, as if it caused him pain. He crossed the room but stopped several feet away, maintaining that careful distance that had characterized all their interactions. "I must speak with you before we proceed with the duties of this marriage." "Of course, Your Grace," she replied, reverting to the formal address, though they were now man and wife. Her hands clutched the silk of her dressing gown. "Geoffrey," he corrected quietly. "When we are alone, I would prefer you call me Geoffrey." He turned away, pacing to the fireplace where he gripped the mantel with both hands, his back to her. The muscles in his shoulders were rigid with tension. "What I am about to tell you, it may make you despise me. It should make you despise me. But I cannot in good conscience consummate this marriage without your knowing the truth of what you have bound yourself to." Eleanor's heart began to race. 1,000 possibilities flooded her mind, each more disturbing than the last. Another wife, hidden away in some asylum. Children born on the wrong side of the blanket, debts that would ruin them both, criminal acts, madness running in the bloodline. "I'm listening," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, calling upon all those years of training in maintaining composure. Geoffrey remained silent for a long moment, his knuckles white against the dark marble of the mantel. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The manner of my father's death. The riding accident that gave me the title at 18. It was not an accident, Eleanor. I killed him." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly, her vision narrowing. She reached out to steady herself against the bedpost, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. Murder. Her husband was confessing to murder. "I don't understand," she managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. Geoffrey turned then, and the anguish in his face was so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. "My father was not the man society believed him to be. In public he was the perfect English aristocrat, charming, generous, beloved by all. But in private, within the walls of this house, he was a monster." His voice cracked on the last word. "He beat my mother savagely for 20 years, for any imagined slight, any failure to meet his impossible standards. I grew up hearing her screams, seeing her bruises that she covered with powder and long sleeves. She died when I was 16, and the physician ruled it a weak heart, but I knew the truth. He had broken something inside her that could not be mended." Eleanor's hand went to her throat, horrified, but unable to look away from the tortured confession pouring out of this man she barely knew. After she died, his cruelty turned to the servants, to anyone who displeased him. He was careful, always careful, never leaving marks where society could see them. "And Geoffrey's voice filled with self-loathing, "I did nothing. I was a coward, Eleanor. I went off to Cambridge. I told myself there was nothing I could do, that I was powerless against him. But the truth was, I simply wanted to escape." He moved away from the fireplace, pacing like a caged animal. "Then, 2 years after my mother's death, I came home for Christmas and found him beating one of the young maids. She was 16, Eleanor, 16 years old, and he had her trapped in the library, hitting her because she had accidentally knocked over a decanter of his precious French brandy." Geoffrey stopped pacing and looked directly at Eleanor, his dark eyes blazing with remembered rage and present shame. Something broke inside me. All the years of helpless fury, all the times I had turned away and done nothing, it all exploded. I pulled him off her, and we fought, truly fought, not like gentlemen, but like animals. We crashed through the library, destroying furniture, and then we were in the hallway, on the grand staircase. He was shouting that I was weak, that I was pathetic, that I would never be worthy of the Ashford name. And then he charged at me, and I stepped aside. The confession came faster now, as if Geoffrey could not stop the words once they had begun. He lost his balance, fell down the entire length of the stairs, broke his neck. I stood there and watched him die, and Eleanor, God help me, I felt relief, joy even. The servants who witnessed it said it was an accident, that he had stumbled. The magistrate ruled it misadventure, but I knew the truth. I could have caught him. I had the reflexes. I was young and quick. I could have grabbed his arm and pulled him back. Instead, I let him fall. I let him die. I am a murderer, Eleanor, whatever pretty lies society chooses to believe. The silence that followed his confession was absolute. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, the crackle of the fire, the sound of Geoffrey's ragged breathing. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile this terrible story with the controlled, proper duke she had thought she was marrying. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a man carrying a burden of guilt that threatened to crush him. "The past 12 years," Geoffrey continued, his voice now dull with exhaustion, "I have tried to be worthy of the title I gained through violence. I've been just to my servants, generous to my tenants, honorable in all my dealings. But the guilt remains. The knowledge that I am not the noble duke everyone believes me to be, but simply a man who killed his father and has been living a lie ever since." He walked back to the mantel and pulled out a folded document from behind the clock. "I have had my solicitor prepare this. It grants you an annulment on the grounds of non-consummation and provides you with a substantial settlement, enough to live independently for the rest of your life. You need not be shackled to a murderer, Eleanor. I will not touch you. I will not bind you to this cursed name. You can return to your father's house tonight, and by month's end you will be free." He crossed the room and placed the document on the small table beside her, his movements defeated, his shoulders slumped. "I married you because my advisors insisted I needed an heir, that the line must continue. But I cannot burden you with the truth of what I am. So I am giving you the choice I never gave my father, the choice my mother never had. The freedom to escape." Eleanor stared at the document, her hand trembling as she picked it up. The words swam before her eyes: annulment, settlement, freedom. Everything she had been taught told her she should seize this opportunity, should flee from this man and his dark history. No one would blame her. She would be the pitiable duchess who had been deceived, granted sympathy and independence. But as she looked at Geoffrey, at the way he stood with his back to her, his entire posture radiating shame and expectation of rejection, she felt something unexpected rise within her. Not fear, not disgust, but recognition. She saw in him the same caged feeling she had lived with all her life, the same desperate desire to be known and accepted for one's true self rather than the mask society demanded. Eleanor set the document down without reading it. "Geoffrey," she said quietly, and he flinched at the sound of his name. "Look at me." He turned slowly, his face a mask of anticipated pain, like a man awaiting execution. "What happened to the maid?" Eleanor asked. "The 16-year-old girl your father was beating." Geoffrey blinked, clearly not expecting this question. "Her name was Mary Winters. I gave her a settlement and a reference to a good position in Bath, away from this house and its memories. She married a shopkeeper 3 years later. I have checked on her welfare regularly through my solicitor. She has 2 children and appears content. And the other servants your father abused. I found positions for those who wished to leave, provided compensation for all. I changed the entire household structure to ensure such cruelty could never happen again. But Eleanor, you must understand." "No," she interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. "You must understand. You have spent 12 years punishing yourself for stopping a violent man who was in the act of beating a child. You believe you are a murderer because you did not save the man who slowly murdered your mother through cruelty and violence." Geoffrey's eyes widened. "I let him fall. I could have—" "You were a young man who had just witnessed yet another act of brutality. You were not thinking clearly, and even if you did consciously choose not to save him in that split second, I cannot find it in myself to condemn you for it." Eleanor took a step toward him, her hands clasped tightly together to stop their shaking. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Geoffrey? I do not see a murderer. I see a man who has spent half his life trying to atone for protecting the innocent. I see someone who has been as trapped by circumstance and duty as I have been." "Eleanor, you cannot possibly—" "I can, and I do." She took another step closer. "You gave me a choice tonight. You offered me freedom because you believed I deserved the truth. Do you know what no one has ever done for me? Given me a choice. My entire life has been mapped out by others. What I should wear, how I should speak, whom I should marry, how I should think and feel and exist. I have been a thing to be molded and arranged, never a person with my own desires and will." Her voice grew stronger as something inside her began to unfurl, like a plant long kept in darkness finally reaching sunlight. "You showed me tonight a vulnerability that I would wager no one else has ever seen. You trusted me with your darkest moment, and now I will trust you with mine. I am desperately, achingly tired of being the perfect, placid ornament everyone expects me to be. I do not know who I truly am because I have never been permitted to find out." Geoffrey stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "What are you saying?" Eleanor reached out and picked up the annulment document. For a moment, Geoffrey's face tightened with resignation. Then she walked to the fireplace and threw it into the flames. They both watched as the paper caught fire, curling and blackening, the legal words that promised freedom transforming into ash. "I am saying," Eleanor said, turning back to face him, "that I do not want to return to being my father's dependent daughter, waiting for some other arrangement to be made for me. I am saying that perhaps we both deserve the chance to be something other than what has been expected of us. You need not be defined solely by that one terrible night, and I need not be defined solely by my ability to pour tea prettily and embroider cushions." She moved closer until only a few feet separated them. "I do not know you well, Geoffrey, and you do not know me, but I would like to try. I would like to see if two people who have been trapped by circumstances might find some measure of freedom together rather than alone." "I have carried this guilt for so long," Geoffrey said, his voice rough with emotion. "I feared that if anyone knew the truth, they would see me as the monster I believed myself to be. You should be horrified, Eleanor. You should despise me." "Perhaps I should," she agreed. "But I find I cannot muster horror for a young man protecting a child from violence. What I feel instead is—" She searched for the word, "sad. Sad that you have borne this alone for 12 years. Sad that you believed yourself unworthy of understanding or compassion." Geoffrey's carefully maintained control finally cracked. His face crumpled with an emotion so raw it made Eleanor's heart ache. "I do not know how to do this," he confessed. "I have held myself apart from everyone for so long. I do not know how to be a true husband, how to let someone close." "Then we shall learn together," Eleanor said, "because I do not know how to be a true wife, not the kind who is merely decorative, but the kind who is a partner, a friend. We are both stepping into unknown territory, Geoffrey. Perhaps that is not a weakness, but an opportunity." She held out her hand to him, a simple gesture, but one heavy with meaning. For a long moment, Geoffrey stared at it as if it was something miraculous and terrifying in equal measure. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, his fingers trembling slightly as they interlaced with hers. "I do not deserve your understanding," he said quietly. "Perhaps not," Eleanor replied with a small smile, "but you have it nonetheless. And Geoffrey, you gave me a choice tonight. Now I am giving you one. We can spend our marriage as polite strangers, occupying the same houses but separate lives. Or we can try to truly know one another, imperfections and secrets and all. I choose the latter. What do you choose?" Geoffrey looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. In his eyes, she saw hope warring with fear, the tentative possibility that perhaps he might be granted something he had thought forever beyond his reach. Acceptance, understanding, perhaps even love. "I choose you," he whispered. "I choose to try." What followed was not the wedding night of romantic fantasies, but something Eleanor found infinitely more precious. They sat together before the fire, still holding hands, and they talked. Geoffrey told her about his mother, about her love of music and poetry, about how she had tried to shield him from his father's cruelty. He spoke of his years at Cambridge, of the studies that had given him escape, of his determination to be a different kind of duke than his father had been. Eleanor, in turn, found herself speaking of things she had never voiced aloud. Her loneliness after her mother's death, her fears that she was nothing but a pretty shell with no substance, her secret dreams of travel and adventure, her love of Gothic novels that Miss Pemberton had deemed inappropriate for a young lady. She confessed that she found most of society's rules arbitrary and silly, that she had opinions about politics she had never been permitted to express, that sometimes she wanted to run through the gardens with her hair unbound like she had as a child. As the night deepened and the candles burned low, they moved from tragic confessions to small revelations to genuine laughter. Geoffrey had a dry wit that emerged once his guard was down, and Eleanor discovered she enjoyed matching it with clever observations of her own. They were like two prisoners who had been granted an unexpected reprieve, marveling at the strange freedom of honest conversation. Near dawn, as the first light began to touch the windows, Eleanor found herself yawning. Geoffrey immediately rose. "You must be exhausted. I have kept you awake the entire night with your honesty," Eleanor interrupted, "which is worth more to me than sleep. But yes, I am quite tired." Geoffrey looked uncertain. "I should return to my chambers. We need not, that is, there is no urgency for—" Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Geoffrey, stay. Not for duty or obligation, but because I would like to sleep beside my husband, knowing we have begun this marriage with truth rather than pretense." So they lay down together in the massive ducal bed, still clothed, maintaining a respectful distance, but connected by their joined hands in the space between them. As Eleanor drifted into sleep, she felt something she had never expected to feel on her wedding night: hope. Not for a fairy tale romance, but for something potentially more valuable. A genuine partnership built on acceptance and the shared determination to forge lives of their own choosing. The Duke of Ashford, who had believed himself unworthy of love or understanding, held his wife's hand and felt the crushing weight of 12 years of guilt begin, ever so slightly, to ease. The months following their wedding night transformed both Eleanor and Geoffrey in ways neither had anticipated. What began as careful honesty between two strangers evolved into genuine friendship, and then into something deeper, a partnership where both felt safe enough to shed the protective layers they had worn for so long. Eleanor discovered that Geoffrey possessed a keen intellect and genuine curiosity about the world. He had been educated at Cambridge in natural philosophy and mathematics, and his library at Ashford Hall held not just the expected collection of leather-bound classics, but also works on emerging scientific theories, political treatises, and controversial philosophical texts. When she expressed interest, he was initially surprised, then delighted to find his wife capable of engaging with ideas rather than merely nodding politely. They established a routine of spending evenings in the library, discussing everything from agricultural innovations to the rights of working people to whether the new railway schemes would transform England. Geoffrey began asking her opinion on estate matters and was often startled by her practical insights. Eleanor, who had been educated to be ornamental, discovered she had a genuine talent for understanding land management and tenant welfare. The servants at Ashford Hall noticed the change in their master. The grim tension that had characterized the Duke for years eased. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, and the haunted look that had never quite left his eyes began to fade. The staff, who had served him loyally despite his stern demeanor, found themselves serving with affection instead. But as autumn turned to winter, and then to spring, it became clear that this private happiness could not remain entirely private. As Duke and Duchess of Ashford, they had social obligations. In May of 1815, when news of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo reached England, London society erupted in celebrations, and the Duke was expected to bring his new Duchess to town for the season. Eleanor felt her old anxieties resurface at the prospect. "I do not think I can go back to being that perfectly blank creature I was before," she confessed to Geoffrey, as they prepared for the journey to their London residence. "Now that I have tasted what it is to speak my mind, to be myself, I fear I shall say something inappropriate and embarrass you." Geoffrey took her face in his hands, a casual intimacy that had developed between them over the months. "Eleanor, you could never embarrass me. And if society finds you inappropriate for having thoughts and opinions, then society is even more ridiculous than we both suspect it to be. I married you expecting a perfect duchess. Instead, I received an extraordinary woman. I would not trade that for anything." Thus bolstered, Eleanor arrived in London with her husband and found herself thrust into the glittering cutthroat world of the Tun. The townhouse on Berkeley Square was elegant and imposing, and within days of their arrival, invitations flooded in from every prominent hostess in London. The new Duchess of Ashford was a figure of intense curiosity. She had married one of England's most eligible and enigmatic peers, and society was eager to take her measure. It was at their third social engagement, a musical evening at the home of Lady Pemberton, that Eleanor encountered Viscount Reginald Hartley and his wife, the former Miss Clarissa Davenport. The Viscountess was everything Eleanor had been taught a perfect lady should be: delicate, agreeable, accomplished in all the proper feminine arts, her conversation limited to weather, fashion, and the most superficial social gossip. "Your Grace," Clarissa cooed, her blue eyes wide with feigned warmth. "How wonderful to finally meet you. We were all so surprised when the Duke chose to marry so quietly. Usually, gentlemen of his stature select brides with rather more fanfare." The implication was clear. Eleanor had been a disappointing choice, rushed and unremarkable. Before her marriage, Eleanor would have smiled blandly and accepted the veiled insult. But months of honest conversation with Geoffrey had changed her. "Indeed," Eleanor replied coolly. "My husband prefers substance to spectacle. I find it an admirable quality." Clarissa's smile tightened. "Of course, though one does wonder what you do with your time tucked away at Ashford Hall. It must be terribly dull with no society to speak of." "On the contrary, I find our discussions of estate management, political economy, and natural philosophy quite engaging, though I suppose such topics might seem dull to those with less curiosity about the world." The exchange was noted by nearby listeners, and Eleanor saw eyebrows raise with interest. She had just done something radical. She had defended herself with wit, rather than retreating into maidenly silence. Clarissa looked momentarily stunned, then recovered with a tinkling laugh that sounded forced. "How original! I do hope the Duke appreciates such blue-stocking tendencies. Most gentlemen prefer their wives to focus on more traditional feminine pursuits." "Va! Most gentlemen are fools," came Geoffrey's voice from behind Eleanor. He had materialized at her side, placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. His dark eyes fixed on Clarissa with an intensity that made the Viscountess step back. "I prefer my wife to have a functioning mind. Novel concept, I realize, but there it is." Clarissa's husband, Viscount Hartley, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ashford, my dear fellow, no offence intended. My wife merely intended to subtly insult the Duchess in her own hearing," Geoffrey finished. "Yes, I gathered that. Perhaps you might instruct your wife in proper manners before the next social gathering. Now, if you'll excuse us." He guided Eleanor away, but not before she caught the venomous look Clarissa shot her. They found a quiet corner near the windows overlooking the garden, and Geoffrey's stern expression softened into amusement. "Well, that was diverting. I had no idea you possessed such a sharp tongue." "I surprised myself," Eleanor admitted, her heart still racing, "but she was insufferable, and I found I could not simply stand there and accept it." "Good," Geoffrey said firmly. "Never accept it. You are the Duchess of Ashford, Eleanor. You bow to no one, certainly not to a minor viscountess with delusions of importance." As the season progressed, Eleanor found herself increasingly comfortable in social situations, though never quite fitting the expected mold. She gravitated toward other intelligent women and men of genuine accomplishment, rather than title alone. At one gathering, she found herself in conversation with Dr. Edmund Fairfax, a physician who had served with Wellington's army and was now advocating for improved medical care for the poor. "Your Grace, Doctor," Fairfax said, his weathered face animated with passion, "if we could establish even a few charitable hospitals in London's poorest districts, we could save thousands of lives. But the opposition from those who believe poverty is a moral failing rather than a societal problem is formidable." "Then they are willfully ignorant," Eleanor replied. "I grew up in the country and saw how tenant families suffered when illness struck and they had no access to proper care. It is unconscionable that in a nation as wealthy as ours, we allow children to die for want of basic medical attention." Their conversation attracted others, including several reform-minded members of Parliament. Geoffrey, watching from across the room, felt something shift in his chest. This was not the porcelain doll he had married expecting to tolerate. This was a woman finding her voice, her purpose, her power, and he was desperately, irrevocably falling in love with her. The next significant confrontation came at the Duchess of Richmond's ball in late June. The cream of society was present, and Eleanor, dressed in a gown of deep sapphire silk that Geoffrey had commissioned from London's finest modiste, looked every inch the powerful duchess she was becoming. She wore the Ashford sapphires, a stunning parure that included a necklace, earrings, and bracelet that had belonged to Geoffrey's mother. Clarissa Hartley was also in attendance, along with her sycophantic circle of friends. Throughout the evening, Eleanor felt their eyes upon her, heard their whispered comments. She overheard one particular observation that made her stiffen. She may have snared the Duke, but everyone knows it was merely a business arrangement. He needed an heir, and she was convenient. There is no love there. How could there be? He is so far above her station. Eleanor's instinct was to ignore them, but something reckless stirred in her. She had spent months discovering who she truly was, and she would not let these small-minded people diminish what she and Geoffrey had built together. She turned and walked directly to where Clarissa stood with her coterie. "Lady Hartley," Eleanor said pleasantly, "I could not help but overhear your commentary on my marriage." Clarissa had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable, but rallied quickly. "Your Grace, I was merely making assumptions based on gossip and your own limited imagination," Eleanor finished. "Allow me to correct your misunderstanding. My husband married me because he saw in me the potential for genuine partnership, and I chose to remain his wife because I found in him a man of extraordinary character and integrity. What we have built together is based on mutual respect, honest communication, and yes, love, though I hardly owe you an accounting of my private feelings." She smiled, and there was steel beneath it. "Now, if you will excuse me, I see Dr. Fairfax across the room, and I promise to introduce my husband to him. The Duke has expressed interest in funding Dr. Fairfax's charitable hospital initiative, you see. We believe using our wealth and position to help others is rather more important than spending our time spreading malicious gossip." Eleanor turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving Clarissa sputtering in humiliation. The entire exchange had been witnessed by several influential members of the Ton, and by morning it would be all over London. The new Duchess of Ashford had a spine and was not afraid to use it. She found Geoffrey precisely where she knew he would be, speaking with Dr. Fairfax near the refreshment table. When she approached, Geoffrey's eyes met hers, and the look of pride and admiration she saw there made her heart soar. "Dr. Fairfax," Eleanor said, "my husband and I would like to discuss your hospital proposal in more detail. Perhaps you would call upon us at Berkeley Square tomorrow afternoon." The physician's face lit with surprised gratitude. "Your Grace, your Graces, I would be honored." After Dr. Fairfax moved away, Geoffrey took Eleanor's hand and raised it to his lips, heedless of who might be watching. "What you just did, standing up to that woman, defending our marriage, proposing we actually do something meaningful with our position. Eleanor, you are remarkable." "I am merely being honest," she replied. "Something you taught me the value of on our wedding night. I will not pretend to be less than I am, and I will not tolerate others suggesting our marriage is anything less than what it has become." "And what has it become?" Geoffrey asked softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who had trusted her with his darkest secret, and in doing so had given her permission to be authentic. "It has become the most important thing in my life," she said. "You have become the most important person in my life. I love you, Geoffrey. Not the Duke, not the title, not the wealth, you. The man who reads philosophy in his shirt sleeves and checks on former servants and carries guilt for saving a child from violence." Geoffrey's eyes shone with emotion. Around them the ball continued, hundreds of people dancing and chattering, but for them there was only this moment. "I have loved you for months," he confessed, but I did not dare speak it, for fear you would feel obligated to return the sentiment. Eleanor, you have given me something I thought I could never have. Peace, acceptance, the freedom to be something other than the man I feared I was. Then we have given each other the same gift, Eleanor said. There, in the middle of the Duchess of Richmond's ball, the Duke of Ashford kissed his wife. It was brief, proper enough not to cause absolute scandal, but witnessed by enough people that all of London would know by morning. The Duke and Duchess were genuinely in love, and society's expectations could be damned. The aftermath of the Richmond ball marked a turning point in how society perceived the Duke and Duchess of Ashford. No longer were they viewed as a convenient marriage of position and fortune. Instead, they became known as a formidable partnership, intelligent, socially conscious, and utterly devoted to one another. The charitable hospital project consumed much of their attention over the following months. Eleanor threw herself into the endeavour with enthusiasm, working alongside Dr. Fairfax to identify suitable locations, interview potential staff, and organize a committee of wealthy patrons. She discovered she had a talent for persuasion, particularly when targeting the wives of powerful men. Within 3 months, they had secured enough funding to establish the Ashford Charitable Hospital in Southwark, dedicated to providing free medical care to London's poorest residents. The work was fulfilling in ways Eleanor had never imagined. For the first time in her life, she felt she was contributing something meaningful to the world, that her existence had purpose beyond decoration. Geoffrey supported her completely, often accompanying her on visits to the hospital site, shocking builders and physicians alike with a Duke who was willing to roll up his sleeves and discuss practical details. However, not everyone was pleased with this departure from aristocratic norms. Clarissa Hartley and her circle continued to whisper about the Ashfords' unseemly involvement in charitable work. "It is one thing to donate money," Clarissa was heard to say at a garden party, "quite another to actually associate with the poor. The Duchess has forgotten her place." These criticisms were brought to Eleanor's attention by Aunt Philippa, who had come to stay with them in London and served as a welcome voice of wisdom and irreverent humour. "The harpies are circling, my dear," Philippa said over tea one afternoon. "You have committed the terrible sin of being interesting and useful rather than merely ornamental. They shall never forgive you." Eleanor laughed, pouring more tea into her aunt's cup. "Let them criticize. I have never been happier or felt more purposeful. If that makes me unsuitable for their drawing rooms, I shall count it no great loss." "Good girl," Philippa said approvingly. "Though I must ask, has there been any word from your father? You have been married nearly a year, and I know he has not replied to your letters." The mention of Baron Hartwell brought a shadow of sadness to Eleanor's face. She had written to her father multiple times, hoping to share her happiness and her work, hoping perhaps for his approval or at least his acknowledgement. But no replies had come. Her younger brother Thomas, now at Eton, had written secretly to tell her that their father was angry about the scandal of Eleanor lowering herself to charity work and bringing attention to the Hartwell name for the wrong reasons. "He is unchanged," Eleanor said quietly, "still more concerned with appearances than with actual goodness or happiness. I have made my peace with it, Aunt. My real family now consists of you, Thomas, and Geoffrey. I need no one else." As summer faded into autumn, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. She was in the Ashford Hall garden, supervising the planting of a new herb garden intended to supply the charitable hospital with medicinal plants, when a carriage bearing an unfamiliar crest arrived. From it emerged a woman of perhaps 45, elegantly dressed, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. "Your Grace," the woman said with a curtsy, "forgive my unannounced arrival. My name is Catherine Ashford Thornton. I am Geoffrey's aunt, his mother's sister. I live in Somerset, and I have only recently learned of his marriage. I hoped I might be permitted to call upon you both." Eleanor's surprise quickly turned to warm welcome. "Mrs. Thornton, of course. Please come inside. Geoffrey is in his study, but I know he will be delighted to see you." The reunion between Geoffrey and his aunt was emotional. Catherine Thornton had been estranged from the family during the old Duke's lifetime. He had forbidden her presence after she had tried to help her sister escape his cruelty. She had not seen Geoffrey since he was a boy, and her tears upon seeing the man he had become were genuine. Over dinner that evening, Catherine spoke of Geoffrey's mother with love and detail, sharing memories that Geoffrey had nearly forgotten. "She would be so proud of you," Catherine told her nephew. "Both of you. I have heard of your hospital work, your treatment of your tenants and servants, the genuine partnership of your marriage. You have taken the Ashford name and transformed it into something worthy of respect for the right reasons." Later, when Catherine and Eleanor were alone in the drawing room while Geoffrey attended to some correspondence, the older woman took Eleanor's hand. "I must tell you something," Catherine said. "I know about the manner of my brother-in-law's death. I have always known the truth, that Geoffrey acted to stop him from further violence. I have carried such guilt for not being braver, for not finding a way to help my sister or her son while they suffered." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "Geoffrey carries guilt enough for all of us. He believes himself a murderer for not saving a man who was actively causing harm." "Then you must help him see the truth," Catherine urged. "That night was not murder. It was the inevitable conclusion of a life lived in cruelty. Geoffrey was the victim, not the villain. He needs to forgive himself, Eleanor, and I suspect you are the only person who can help him do so." That night, lying in their bed with Geoffrey's arms around her, Eleanor broached the subject carefully. "Your aunt spoke of your father tonight." She felt Geoffrey tense beside her. "She knows," he said flatly. "I suppose it was inevitable. Now she will regard me with the same horror." "She regards you with pride and love," Eleanor interrupted. "She told me that what happened that night was not your fault, that you were as much a victim as anyone your father harmed." "That is absurd. I was the one who let him fall. I am the one who—" "Geoffrey." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, her hand on his cheek forcing him to meet her eyes in the moonlight streaming through the window. "How long will you punish yourself for surviving a violent man? How long will you carry guilt for protecting an innocent girl? Your aunt is right. You were a victim. A young man traumatized by years of witnessing your mother's abuse, finally pushed beyond endurance. What happened was a tragedy, but it was not murder. The law would say—" "Hang what the law would say," Eleanor said fiercely. "I am your wife, and I say you are a good man who was pushed to an impossible choice in an impossible moment. The Duke you have become, fair, just, generous, devoted to helping others, that is your truth. Not one terrible night 12 years ago." Geoffrey's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How can you be so certain?" "Because I know you," Eleanor said simply. "Because in the year we have been married, I have seen your character in 1,000 small moments. The way you speak to servants as equals, the way you listened to tenant concerns, the way you supported my work at the hospital without hesitation, the way you looked at that former maid Mary Winter's file and smiled because she found happiness. That is who you are, Geoffrey. You need to forgive yourself and accept what the rest of us already know. You are worthy of love, of happiness, of peace." Geoffrey pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, and Eleanor felt his tears wet against her neck. He wept as he had not wept since he was a boy, releasing 12 years of carried guilt and self-hatred. And Eleanor held him, this powerful duke who was also simply a man who needed to hear that he was enough, that he was forgiven, that he was loved. "I do not know what I did to deserve you," he whispered when the storm of emotion had passed. "You trusted me with the truth," Eleanor replied. "You gave me the freedom to choose you, and in choosing you I found myself. That is no small gift, Geoffrey." As winter approached, the Ashfords returned to the country, to Ashford Hall, where their marriage had truly begun. The charitable hospital had opened to great success, with Dr. Fairfax as its chief physician and Eleanor as the primary patron. They had established a model that other wealthy families were beginning to emulate, and Eleanor's reputation had transformed from that unfashionable duchess to a woman of remarkable capability and compassion. They hosted Catherine Thornton for Christmas, along with young Thomas, who had grown tall and clever during his time at school. Aunt Philippa came as well, and for the first time, Geoffrey's ancient family home rang with genuine laughter and warmth. On Christmas Eve, Eleanor found Geoffrey standing in the same spot where he had confessed his secret to her on their wedding night. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "That I am the most fortunate man in England," he said. "That night I thought I was giving you the freedom to escape. Instead, you gave me the freedom to finally live." Eleanor smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other," she said. "That seems a fair exchange." 2 years after their wedding night confession, the Ashford estates flourished under the Duke and Duchess's combined stewardship. Eleanor, now 24, had grown into her role with a grace and authority that impressed even the most traditional members of society. The charitable hospital in Suffolk had expanded to include a training program for nurses, and Eleanor had helped establish 2 more free clinics in other London neighbourhoods. Her work had inspired other aristocratic women to engage in meaningful charity rather than merely hosting perfunctory fundraising balls. But it was at Ashford Hall itself where the most significant transformations had occurred. Eleanor had implemented progressive agricultural methods on the estate farms, increasing yield while improving tenant living conditions. She had established a school for tenant children, hiring educated teachers and ensuring that both boys and girls received instruction in reading, mathematics, and useful trades. Geoffrey, who had already been a fair landlord, marveled at how Eleanor's innovations created a community rather than merely a collection of people working his land. On a bright May morning in 1817, Eleanor stood in the newly completed village schoolhouse, watching 24 children practice their letters. The schoolmaster, Mr. Pemberton, gave her a respectful nod as she observed. These children, sons and daughters of farmers and craftsmen, were receiving an education that might change the trajectory of their lives. It was, Eleanor reflected, far more satisfying than embroidering cushions or playing insipid melodies on the pianoforte. "Your Grace," came a small voice, and Eleanor looked down to find little Mary Saunders, the blacksmith's daughter, holding up her slate. "Did I spell prosperity correctly?" Eleanor examined the careful letters and smiled. "You did perfectly, Mary. Well done." As she walked back to the great house through the spring gardens, she encountered Geoffrey returning from a ride across the estate. He dismounted and fell into step beside her, taking her hand in that casual intimacy that had become natural between them. "How was the school?" he asked. "Thriving." Mary Saunders spelled prosperity without a single error. "I believe she may be cleverer than I was at her age." Geoffrey laughed. "She certainly has a better teacher than you did. No offence to Miss Pemberton, but your old governess seemed more concerned with producing ornaments than educated women." "None taken. I have often thought the same." Eleanor paused by the rose garden, her favourite spot on the estate. "Geoffrey, I received a letter this morning from my father." Geoffrey's expression grew wary. Baron Hartwell had maintained his cold silence for the first year of their marriage, only grudgingly acknowledging their existence after the Queen herself had commented favourably on the Ashford Charitable Hospital. His letters, when they came, were stiff and formal, containing no warmth or genuine interest in his daughter's life. "What does he want?" Geoffrey asked. "Thomas is graduating from Eton next month. Father requests that we attend the ceremony and host a dinner afterward at the London house." Eleanor's tone was carefully neutral. "He also mentions that he has been unwell and wishes to see his daughter." Geoffrey studied her face. "Do you want to go?" Eleanor considered the question honestly. 2 years ago, the prospect of seeing her father would have filled her with anxiety and the desperate hope for his approval. Now she felt mostly sadness for a man who had let pride and propriety rob him of genuine connection with his children. "I would like to see Thomas," she said finally. And I suppose I should see my father, if only to confirm that I no longer need anything from him. They attended Thomas's graduation, a grand affair at Eton's historic grounds. Eleanor's brother had grown into a fine young man of 17, tall and scholarly, with plans to attend Cambridge. He greeted his sister with genuine affection, and when introduced to Geoffrey properly, they had met briefly at Christmas. He shook the Duke's hand with grateful respect. "Thank you for the books you sent," Thomas said earnestly. "The mathematical treatises were extraordinary. My tutor said he had never seen some of those texts." "Your sister mentioned your interest in mathematics and natural philosophy," Geoffrey replied. "I thought you might appreciate them. When you come up to Cambridge, you must visit us. We can discuss your studies." At the dinner following the ceremony, held at the Ashford London house, Baron Hartwell was present, but diminished. Illness had aged him beyond his years, and the proud, domineering man Eleanor remembered had become querulous and uncertain. He said little during dinner, watching his daughter with something that might have been regret. Afterward, he requested a private word with Eleanor in the library. Geoffrey squeezed her hand supportively before she went to face her father alone. "You have done well for yourself," Baron Hartwell said without preamble, his voice raspy. "The Duke seems besotted with you. Most unexpected." "We love each other," Eleanor said simply. "We are partners in more than name." Her father waved a dismissive hand. "Love. I raised you to understand that marriage was a business arrangement. Yet you seem to have stumbled into something more. Not stumbled. Chosen." Eleanor stood by the fireplace, the same confident posture she had developed over 2 years of finding her voice. "Geoffrey and I chose to build a marriage based on honesty and mutual respect. It is the best decision I have ever made." "You have also become quite scandalous," her father said, though his tone lacked its old censure. "Working with the poor, involving yourself in hospital administration, writing letters to Parliament about reform measures. That is not how I trained you." No," Eleanor agreed. "You trained me to be an ornament, to sit prettily and say nothing of substance, but that life would have slowly destroyed me, father. I needed to be more than decorative, and Geoffrey has given me the freedom to discover what that more could be." Baron Hartwell looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw something she had never seen in his eyes before, a glimmer of respect, perhaps even envy. "Your mother would have been like you," he said quietly. "If I had allowed it. She wanted to establish schools on our estate, wanted to improve tenant conditions. I forbade it, told her it was unseemly for a baroness to involve herself in such matters. She died unhappy, Eleanor. I made her unhappy with my insistence on propriety over purpose." It was, Eleanor realized, as close to an apology as her father would ever give. She felt a pang of compassion for this sad, diminished man who had let fear of society's judgment rob him of genuine human connection. "You could still make changes to the Hartwell estate," she suggested gently. "Thomas will inherit eventually, but you could begin implementing reforms now. Give him a better legacy than empty propriety." Her father's eyes brightened slightly. "Perhaps. I am not so old that I cannot learn from my daughter's example." He paused, then added with difficulty, "I am proud of what you have become, Eleanor, even if I was too stubborn and foolish to say so before now." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of desperate need for validation. They were simply tears of closure, of finally releasing the last remnants of the hurt child she had been. "Thank you, Father. That means more than you know." When she returned to Geoffrey, he took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms. "How was it?" "Sad, but also healing. I think we have made our peace, my father and I. He will never be the parent I needed as a child, but perhaps we can be civil adults to one another." "That is more than many achieve," Geoffrey said, kissing her forehead. "I am proud of you for facing him without needing his approval." They remained in London for another week, finalizing plans for a third charitable clinic and meeting with parliamentary allies who supported various reform measures. Eleanor had become known in certain circles as a persuasive advocate for social welfare programs, and Geoffrey's political influence gave her access to men who might otherwise dismiss a woman's opinions. One evening, at a private dinner hosted by a reform-minded earl, they encountered an unexpected face, Mary Winters, the maid Geoffrey had saved from his father years ago. She was now Mrs. Mary Fletcher, wife of a prosperous Bath shopkeeper, and her husband had business connections that brought them occasionally to London. The recognition was mutual and emotional. "Your Grace," Mary said, curtsying to Geoffrey with tears in her eyes, "I heard you had married, that you had become a champion for those less fortunate. I wanted to thank you again for saving my life that terrible night. If you had not intervened—" "You owe me no thanks," Geoffrey said firmly, though his own emotion was evident. "You survived something traumatic and built a good life. That is your triumph, not mine." "Still," Mary persisted, "the settlement you provided, the reference you wrote, those gave me the chance to survive. And now I see you using your position to help others as you helped me. You are a good man, Your Grace. I hope you finally believe that." The Dean, after the Fletchers departed, Geoffrey stood silent for a moment, then turned to Eleanor. "Do you know, I think I finally do believe it. Not because I deserve it, but because I have spent enough years trying to atone that perhaps the scales have balanced. The scales balanced the moment you chose to protect an innocent girl over preserving your father's reputation," Eleanor said. "Everything since has simply been you being who you truly are, a man of integrity and compassion." They returned to Ashford Hall in early summer, to the place where their marriage had truly begun, with that anguished confession and Eleanor's unexpected acceptance. The estate was in full bloom, the gardens lush, the tenant farms prosperous. Eleanor had announced the previous month that she was with child, and the joy that news had brought to Geoffrey's face had been profound. On an evening much like their wedding night, they sat together in their private chambers as the sun set over the ancient parkland. Eleanor was reading correspondence about the hospital expansion while Geoffrey reviewed agricultural reports. It was comfortable, domestic, and deeply satisfying, two people building a life together based on mutual respect and shared purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" Geoffrey asked suddenly. "Not accepting the annulment I offered you?" "You could have been free, Eleanor. You could have traveled, pursued your own interests without being tied to my name and history." Eleanor set down her letters and moved to sit beside him on the settee. She took his hand, their fingers interlacing in that gesture that had become a private language between them. "I am pursuing my interests," she said. "The hospital, the schools, the reforms. I could not do any of that without your position and support. But more than that, Geoffrey, I am free precisely because I chose you. For the first time in my life, I made a choice based on what I wanted rather than what was expected of me. That choice led me to love, to purpose, to becoming the woman I was always meant to be." She placed his hand on the gentle swell of her belly. "And soon we will have a child, a son or daughter, who will grow up in a house free from violence and fear, who will be taught that their worth comes from their character and choices rather than their ability to meet arbitrary social expectations. That is the legacy we are building together, Geoffrey. That is what your confession on our wedding night ultimately created, not shame or scandal, but freedom and hope." Geoffrey pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her and their unborn child. "I thought I was confessing to a murder," he said quietly. "But you helped me see it was a liberation, not just of that one maid, but of myself from my father's shadow, and eventually of both of us from the cages society built for us." "We liberated each other," Eleanor corrected. "You gave me permission to be honest by being honest yourself, and I gave you permission to forgive yourself by accepting you without judgment. That is what true partnership means, I think. Not perfect people, but honest people, choosing every day to see the best in each other." As darkness fell over Ashford Hall, they remained there together, planning for their child's future, for the estate's continued growth, for the expansion of their charitable works. They spoke of possibly traveling to the continent once the baby was old enough, of Eleanor's desire to learn Italian and German, of Geoffrey's plans to establish a lending library in the village. They also spoke of the past, no longer with shame or regret, but with the understanding that their histories, however painful, had shaped them into people capable of building something meaningful together. Geoffrey's terrible confession had not destroyed their marriage. It had formed the foundation of radical honesty upon which all their happiness was built. Later, lying in bed with Eleanor asleep in his arms, Geoffrey reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with his anguished admission of guilt. He had expected her to flee in horror. Instead, she had stayed, had seen through his self-condemnation to the truth beneath, and had loved him anyway. More than that, she had helped him transform from a man haunted by his past into a man actively building a better future. Eleanor stirred slightly in her sleep, her hand resting on her belly, and Geoffrey felt a surge of profound gratitude. On their wedding night, he had confessed what he believed was a dark secret that would drive her away. But her unexpected reply, her acceptance, her choice to see him as a victim rather than a villain, had indeed changed his world. It had changed both their worlds, really. Two people trapped by circumstances and expectations had found in each other the courage to break free and become something neither had dared imagine. They had discovered that true intimacy came not from hiding one's flaws, but from revealing them and being accepted anyway. And from that vulnerable beginning, they had built a partnership of genuine equality, mutual respect, and profound love. The Duke of Ashford, who had once believed himself unworthy of happiness, now understood that worthiness was not something granted by perfection, but created through honest effort, compassion, and the courage to change. And Eleanor, once nothing more than a decorative object in her father's plans, had become a woman of purpose, influence, and authentic selfhood. Their story would never be the fairy tale of love at first sight or effortless romance. It was better than that. It was the story of two imperfect people who chose honesty over pretense, who worked together to heal old wounds and build new dreams, and who discovered that freedom came not from having no bonds, but from choosing which bonds to forge. As dawn broke over the English countryside, painting the ancient stones of Ashford Hall in shades of gold and rose, the Duke and Duchess slept peacefully, their hands still joined even in dreams. Two souls who had found in each other not just a partner, but a path to becoming their truest selves. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.